Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is BJ Davis. I'm a senior consultant here at DRiWaterstone Human Capital, and I work and specialize in organizations focused on LGBTQ rights, human services, social justice, and many other organizations and sectors in the nonprofit space. It's my pleasure today to be moderating this conversation with an incredible panel and talking about how we shape an inclusive workplace. And specifically, because if you think about an inclusive workplace, that is a very broad topic and can mean a lot of different things and can mean a lot of different things to people. So in this conversation, we're gonna hone in and talk about inclusivity in the workplace with LGBTQ, the LGBTQ community, which is really exciting as I am a member of that community myself. And a topic that is of great personal interest and passion for me as I've now moved into this work with DRiWaterstone. So with that, I'm just going to take one moment and share a little about DRiWaterstone and the firm to give you a little background. DRiWaterstone is, we're experts in the human capital consulting field. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we have staff across the country. So I am based in Southern California, out here in Newport Beach, and we have staff in D.C., Arlington, St. Louis, Ohio, you name it. We are definitely spread out nationwide. With that, let's just set the stage a little bit. I'd love to share with folks listening and to share with you all some statistics that we pulled up for the conversation today from EY's 2024 US LGBTQ Workplace Barometer. Hearing some of these statistics is really kind of just, a foundation for where we're about to go with this conversation. So 36% of millennial LGBTQ plus employees and 40% of Gen Z LGBTQ plus employees left their jobs because their companies were not welcoming of LGBTQ employees. So that's quite significant, particularly when you think folks are actually talking about it, looking for it, and thinking about it in the workplace today. LGBTQ employees who are racially or ethnically diverse were 1.7 times more likely than their white LGBTQ colleagues to have experienced harassment in a previous employment setting, and 42% say that their professional advancement was hindered because of that. And then lastly, Gen Z respondents were 3 times more likely than the overall group surveyed to report feeling unsure about their company's initiatives and focused on LGBTQ employees. And given that approximately 20% of Gen Z adults identify as LGBTQ+, this represents a huge opportunity for employers who are looking to attract and retain young and upcoming talent. So we're just gonna go ahead and move right in. As part of DRiWaterstone's Pride Month celebration, we're welcoming our panel of experts, if you will, in the LGBTQ space and just their own lived experience to have a conversation around what shapes inclusivity in the workplace for LGBTQ employees and what their own experiences have been. So let's go ahead and dive right in with some quick introductions. I'll just share we have with us on the call Kyle Garcia, who is the Chief Development Officer at the Girl Scouts of Northern California, Santana Moreno, who is the Development Director with Funders for Reproductive Equity, and Steve Roth, who is the Executive Director for ORAM, which is the Organization for Refuge, Asylum, and Migration. So I'd love to invite each of you to take 2 to 3 minutes to introduce yourself, your pronouns, a little about your background, the organization you work for, and your role. So Kyle, why don't we go ahead and kick it off with you?
Thanks, BJ, and thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be with this group. I can't wait to hear what you'll have to say. So as BJ introduced me, I'm the Chief Development Officer for the Girl Scouts of Northern California. It's a very large footprint. We're in 19 counties in Northern California, serving 25,000 girls. We have 24,000 adult volunteers, and we really are in the operations of girls empowerment. What we do is we develop girls of confidence and character. We build leaders in across the state of California, and we really believe that Girl Scouts curriculum builds girls. We go out in society and they could really make a difference. We promote something called the GSLE, which is actually a curriculum that involves entrepreneurship, which is selling cookies and building websites and having a little business. It's bringing kids out in the outdoors and teaching them that, and just really strong leadership skills. Personally, I have a very long, very deep background in a not-for-profit development, in raising money for universities and not-for-profits. I've also consulted with over 150 organizations. I've raised $68 million in my career, so I have deep experience in this field. I've been a CEO, and I've also been in the line. So I think it's part of what I bring to this conversation is my depth of background, and that I've been within and without in an organization and really experienced DEI on so many different levels. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I appreciate that. Santana, why don't we move to you for your introduction?
My name is Santana Moreno. I use they, them pronouns. I am the development director at Funders for Reproductive Equity, or FREE, as we call it. FREE is a philanthropic organizing institution and the only one solely dedicated to reproductive health rights and justice. We urge local, national, and international philanthropy to fund reproductive equity and justice that specifically centers racial and gender justice, from the smallest community foundations to the largest philanthropies on the planet. And as development director, I'm on the senior leadership team for the organization, and I create and execute all resource mobilization and fundraising strategies for the team. We encourage funders to resource free so that we can better organize philanthropy to take strategic action, while also building community with one another to better understand what's really happening in the repro funding universe. I've built my career fundraising for intersectional movement building specifically, and that's kind of what my lane that I stick to. And my career is really driven by a deeper purpose and a theory of change to reclaim and redirect reparative aligned resources toward progressive organizations that serve and uplift communities living at the margins of society. That's kind of my guiding star. So yeah, really happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much, Santana. Appreciate that. And Steve, finally, I'd love to have you share a little about your background and introduce yourself.
Sure. Again, my name is Steve Roth. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director at ORAM, the Organization for Refuge, Asylum, and Migration. We were founded in 2008, and we're the oldest and largest nonprofit focused exclusively on the protection and empowerment of LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers. So these are, as you can imagine, some of the most marginalized members of the broader LGBTQ community. We focus our work primarily in what we call transit countries. So after people have left their country of origin, but before they've been resettled to a country like the US or Canada or Western Europe. So our work is focused primarily on protection, empowerment, and sustaining the sector. And a lot of that empowerment work focuses on economic empowerment, jobs, job skills and training, and seed funding to start businesses. And the protection piece is a lot of short-term housing, since a lot of folks are facing housing issues. Prior to this, I've been in this role about 5 years, and immediately prior to this, I was the senior director of global initiatives at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. Out and Equal is the world's largest nonprofit focused exclusively on inclusion of LGBTQ people in the workplace, and I built global programs there. And before moving into advocacy about 12 years ago, I actually spent the first half of my career in the private sector. So I'm one of those rare folks that have straddled both the private sector and the nonprofit arena. And I like to hope that I bring the best of both of those worlds together in approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Steve. So as folks can see, we have a great panel here to guide us in this conversation, and appreciate once again all of you joining us. And so with that, let's dive in and talk a little about what inclusivity means. So we know inclusivity can mean a lot of different things to different people. And I'd love to hear from each of you what that means to you. And Steve, why don't we go in reverse and we'll start with you.
Sure, absolutely. It's and you're right, BJ. This is a topic that is discussed a lot, and I feel like in more recent days has become a bit maligned as well. And so it's important to unpack it and talk about what we mean. And I heard an expression a while back that I like that I think can add some context to this, and that is when we talk about diversity and inclusion, and that is that diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so it's that sense of the next level of really being a part of, being included in decision-making processes, having a seat at the table. We have a saying in our work in kind of the global space that's used. It's really talking more about localization involving the people we serve, but that's nothing about us without us. And that really applies in the workplace as well. And our, inclusion means that LGBTQ folks are being, at those decision-making tables that are being included in discussions and conversations at the very highest levels of the company. There's another level to this that a lot of organizations are focusing on, and certainly we were pioneering at Out and Equal when I was there, and that I think is it applies as well, and that's taking it beyond the level of inclusion even to the notion of belonging. And if you use that same analogy of diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, belonging is dancing like no one's watching. And so that's a sense of truly fitting in, truly feeling a part of, not being kind of an oddity or a case study, but being able to truly be who you are and be a part of the organization that you belong to.
Steve, I really love what you were sharing and that perspective, and certainly bringing the belonging piece into the conversation, because I do think in the last several years, belonging has become a big part of this conversation. And I can certainly harken back to when tolerance was the big thing. Tolerance is what we want. And we've come such a long way in this space that it is really now inclusion and belonging and just being authentic, which is, we still have plenty of, we've got a long way to go still, but it's definitely evolved. So thank you for that. Santana, I'd love to hear your perspective on inclusivity or inclusion in the workplace.
Mirroring a lot of what Steve just said, inclusivity is more than just a box to check. It's not just a physical show of like diversity by hiring queer people, hiring people of color. It's putting your money where your mouth is and using like multifaceted approaches to building a culture of inclusion through like organizational and social approaches within your workplace, and not in a performative way, in like a real way. Like if you say you're a pro-Black organization and you want to support your Black staff, there are just some obvious things to me. Like you can't just let MLK or Juneteenth Day go by while forcing your Black staff to work or take their own PTO. And now that we're in Pride Month, that means more than just putting a rainbow on a staff meeting agenda or in a logo. Like, what is the organization doing to tangibly welcome and nurture a comforting and safe environment for its queer staff? Do they offer health care? Does their health care policy support gender affirming care? Do they offer alternative parenting benefits? Even things as simple as like, do they encourage staff to put pronouns in their email signatures? There's just like there's a suite of thousands of ways to really ensure or encourage an inclusive atmosphere. And really, inclusivity just means action, like the dance, like Steve was saying.
Kyle, I'd love to hear your perspective.
So I want to talk about leadership and inclusive leadership, because that's so important. It's to listen to all the voices in the room. It's to lead by example in that way. It's more than just social equity, BIPOC, having BIPOC people, gender expansive youth. As a matter of fact, with the Girl Scouts, it's more than that. It's leading in an inclusive way, and like Santana was saying, and building that culture of inclusivity. And that's where you retain staff, you retain employees, people are happier. And it also involves, and I learned this a lot from La Familia, as an organization that I worked with, the mental health organization that also spans Northern California. I worked there before here. And something that I really learned very strongly there is recognition was also so important. Is not only listening to the voices in the room, but recognizing everybody in the room. And that circular leadership. Everybody's voice matters. We all care about everybody. And that's what builds that inclusive culture. And I think for generations to come, because every time you touch a staff member's life, they change. And when you recognize them, they become stronger. It builds a stronger organization, stronger culture, stronger leaders. And that's what I believe.
Great. That's amazing. It's great. So Santana, I'd love to move to you and sort of dive in a little and ask, do you think there's a difference or different expectation for LGBTQ individuals coming into the workplace today, both in terms of the environment, but also in terms of how they show up as an employee?
This is a really great question, because it asks about today. And it would feel naive for me not to acknowledge the increasingly dangerous times we're living in right now for queer people in the United States and across the globe. There's this strange duality in living in 2024 that makes this question complicated. Like, on one hand, there's been so much progress over history toward equity and justice for queer people, and so many advancements toward DEI for LGBTQ people in the workplace. And because of that history, a lot of us are we enter jobs expecting some level of acceptability and inclusion and comfort. I remember a period when I was first entering the workforce, pre-marriage equality, and I was afraid of looking or sounding too queer, or being too out of the box. But as I built my own confidence over the years, I haven't thought that way for so many years, and that definitely speaks toward the overall progress we've seen. But we are living in a period right now, and Steve mentioned this earlier, there's intense backlash and regression against DEI efforts right now, and not just DEI, but an overall regression in a lot of pockets of society, with attacks on trans bodies, attacks on abortion, attacks on drag queens, racial justice and affirmative action, overall attacks on affinity groups and initiatives. There are even groups pushing and angling to try and take back same-sex marriage in the Supreme Court. So all of this is actively happening right now, and they're being very vocal about it. So on one hand, I think queer people at work, we are seeing all of these things. And maybe maybe there are some queer people that are afraid of, or all of us, we're afraid of what that can mean for the future, to be queer in the workplace. What is that going to look like 20 years from now? All the advancements we've made over decades. But I think in the face of, that growing hatred and oppression, it makes me feel personally even more committed to showing up as my authentic self. Since I am in a position where I'm able to do that, it feels even more important for me to be unapologetically queer, especially for those people that maybe feel a little less confident in their queerness, or younger folks that are entering the workforce amidst this climate, this kind of fraught climate, and they need to look for those beacons of hope to look toward. I also want to mention, I think it's important as queer people to remain connected to our history and to remind ourselves that this moment isn't necessarily new for queer communities. History repeats itself, and we have a history literally built from resistance and resilience. So we need to remain connected to that history of resistance and power, our elders that saved, I don't think of myself as an elder, and yet some of the things I had to fight for, Gen Z, hasn't necessarily had, there's just a repeating generational resistance in our communities that empowers us. So part of me is afraid that some queer folks will feel less confident to make demands for themselves, that they'll be afraid to show up authentically at work. And because of that, I have to believe, in my own safe space and safe work culture, working in social justice, I feel a real responsibility to act as an example for others to look toward. others that maybe aren't working in as safe or welcoming environments as I am. I have friends that aren't working in as safe or welcoming environments as I am. So for people like me to be bold and show up as myself, like that has to make a difference. So I will keep prioritizing workplaces that have safe and inclusive policies, inclusive cultures, workplaces that aren't afraid to center and celebrate queer staff, and ideally places that take months like this month, like Pride Month, to uplift our communities. Like this moment is so strange, like so much progress, so many attacks from the right with its Project 2025 and everything. Like I have to remain just as bold and committed as they are. Anyways, I hope I didn't rant too much.
No, that's Santana, that was great. And I appreciate the idea and the revisiting history and really thinking through or highlighting history repeats itself. We've been here before. I think all of us on this call have different experiences in different decades, if you will, and I find myself sitting in a very unique position that I grew up in very rural, the Blue Ridge Mountains on a farm. Went to college in the Blue Ridge Mountains and immediately left and started an internship at the Human Rights Campaign. And I think at a very young age of 21, 22, I had an opportunity to show up as my authentic self in a way many people did not have at that time. And so I appreciate this moment and highlighting that and where we're headed in all of this. Thank you for that. And so, and you also transitioned well, Kyle, to this question for you. When we think about development efforts, you've been a fundraiser for a very long time and sat in a lot of many different seats. Are donors thinking about, or are you encountering conversations with donors who want to support organizations? They don't necessarily have to be LGBTQ organizations, but they want them to be inclusive of LGBTQ people or supportive. Are you finding that with donors that you talk to?
Absolutely. And across my long career, that's increased more and more and more. And last 5 years, even more so. It's an investment. Donors, grantors, funders, even volunteers, you are investing in the organization. And they're putting DEIB and belonging frontline and center. They know that a healthy culture is a successful business. It's a successful not-for-profit. It's just successful overall. And so definitely, for example, our grant funders, they always want to see our demographics. Does our board reflect the community that we work in? Does our staff reflect the community? It shows up over and over again. So absolutely, donors and individual funders, they're savvy now. They're so savvy. They go on Charity Navigator, all the networks, and they want to see not only financially how you're performing, but how culturally you're performing and how you're showing up in the community. And I just think that's so important. And it's so important in my long career, how it's grown and how we're doing more and more. DEIB is evolving and we're always learning new things and recognizing our own biases. And donors, we're also putting our donors to task in some ways because of people that we talk to, for example, our board or our funders. We're also asking them how they show up. We want them to be partners with us and really know where we stand. For example, the Girl Scouts of Northern California, we believe in gender fluidity. So if you identify as a girl, you are a girl at the Girl Scouts. And bringing our donors and our community up with us and standing next to us is so important. And our donors are coming there. They really are with the Girl Scouts. I've been with other organizations in my past that weren't so involved, but in Northern California, absolutely. And yes, funders really care. And it's growing more and more. It's an investment.
Yeah. I'd love to hear also a little more about, so Kyle, some of your past experiences in the workplace. You sort of say you've worked with some spaces that haven't been so accepting. What was that like for you as you moved forward in your career and thought about what's next for me, or how do I show up in my next space?
Well, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I didn't see myself as any different than anybody else. I didn't even realize how absolutely liberal and open my family and my peers really were. And then I moved to Kansas. And in Kansas, I ran a successful business. I got involved in the not-for-profit world. Again, I didn't think I was so different. But then marriage equality happened in 2015, and everything changed. I was the CEO of an organization in Kansas that it was a wonderful organization, but when that topic happened, it was unbelievable how the schism grew. And then there was the donors against the funders, against the board, against me. And as a CEO from grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, it was so confusing for me. And it was so hard for me. And as part of the community, I kept pushing my leadership forward and tried to say, we have to be inclusive. And I felt like at that time, I was a pioneer in DEIB. I really did feel that way in Kansas. And which was shocking for me because I never saw myself as any different than anybody else. And it was a lot of hard work to bring that organization up to speed. I eventually left the organization. I couldn't bring them there. I'm happy to report that today they are, but it took them another 15 years to get there. And so as I've grown older, I'm also leading in that space where I'm doing the work, that I'm a leader, that I'm showing up for the community and for the organization and the girls. That's how I landed with the Girl Scouts, actually. I really want to be a leader in this space.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that. So thinking, kind of moving into our next question, this is, Steve and Santana, this is for you, but also Kyle, please jump in. And of course, anybody can comment on any of these questions. Don't feel like there's a specific order we have to go in. Feel free to comment as you would like. But for companies looking to be on the leading edge of equality, equity, inclusion, what are some best practices, sort of going back to what you were saying earlier, Santana, that we should, look for or we should be practicing in the workplace?
Sure. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, creating an inclusive workplace is about multifaceted action and approaches, like whether that's the nonprofit sector or in for-profit. And there are a lot of really positive and affirming examples from both that have shown us what it means for an organization to be truly inclusive. I think one of the most obvious I can mention is like inclusive benefits policies. Like, does the healthcare policy support queer health, like gender affirming care? Does the parental leave policy really account for parental leave versus maternity leave? And does that like include adoption and surrogacy? Are there alternative benefits like adoption assistance programs, surrogate reimbursement, travel reimbursement for gender affirming care? There are just so many new approaches to benefits that I've personally seen that are really exciting. There's also a lot of things an organization can do to just generally build an inclusive culture. Like if an organization is more behind on it, diversity training on queer issues can be incredibly important. Also, Steve mentioned this earlier, but like employee resource groups have been incredible for so many queer people at especially larger companies. And beyond that, like it's good for companies to have an overall eye and attention to detail when it comes to like inclusive organizational language or just like inclusivity, that could include encouraging staff to put their pronouns when appropriate. Like how is an organization talking about the communities that it serves in its language? Is it almost intentionally exclusionary? Another thing I do think is important to mention, in particular as it's increasingly getting attacked by bad actors, inclusive hiring. Like, this is the right place to talk about that, but like so much progress has been made in recent years to have staff and leadership better represent the real world. And regardless of what fringe actors will say, we exist. We will always exist. Even if we were historically left out of leadership positions for decades, or companies or organizations maybe in the past were uncomfortable to hire us, like today, it's so important to remain committed to DEI amidst all of these attacks, because I mean, it would be so awful to wake up in a world where DEI has been dismantled and society is pretending like homophobia, transphobia, racism, all of it doesn't exist when it still palpably does, and we're in a world where we're increasingly left out of these leadership positions again. Like that would be heartbreaking. So it's important for organizations like DRiWaterstone, like other leading progressive consultants to remain on the cutting edge of that, to remain on the curve. I also think it's important for organizations to just regularly assess their policies. The goalpost changes always. Like we mentioned it a couple times. I remember coming out of college and I was looking for tolerance, and like y'all mentioned that. Now I'm looking for far more. That was almost 20 years ago. So like remaining on the cutting edge, like looking toward gender justice leaders, like what they're saying, queer communities, especially like younger queer folks, Gen Z, their goalpost needs to become what the goalpost is, So it's always important to just regularly re-engage and recommit an organization to building an organizational culture and values to meet the moment.
Thank you. Steve, would you like to jump in as well?
Sure. Honestly, Santana covered so many good things. I think they covered a lot of the great points, but Santana mentioned Gen Z, and that's where the future is. Just to put it in context, nearly 30% of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ+. So this is the future, people. This is not like something on the fringe. It's not something that's like, oh, a little, nice to do during Pride Month. Like, this is the future of your organization. So be mindful of that. I will also say that progress is possible for sure and encouraged. And, Kyle talked about that a little bit. I don't know if you all remember a company called Cracker Barrel, which is a Southern chain. They were notorious about 20 years ago for being openly homophobic and transphobic. And they had openly homophobic, transphobic policies where, they fired people and they, didn't welcome people in their restaurants. So they were kind of the poster child of the worst possible thing. They, within the last 10 years, this was during the time I was at Out and Equal, they actually won Best New LGBTQ ERG at Out and Equal Workplace Summit, because they saw that they were doing some things wrong, and they started that journey towards being on the leading edge, and they made a lot of progress. So if you feel, if like this is feeling overwhelming or like a lot, know that you can make progress on it. And these, when we talk about being on the leading edge, these are some of the things to shoot for. Again, Santana mentioned a lot of the really good ones around policies and practices. That's like the baseline. You have to have that stuff. I call that table stakes, just to be in the conversation. But then it goes beyond that. Santana also talked about language and pronouns, which is really important. I mean, even just everyday language. And, I still have to check myself, like saying, hey guys, like that can be, that can have a gender bias. So we have to think about. Some of it is so ingrained, but really being thoughtful and mindful about how we engage with our employees and the space that we create for them. We haven't talked as much about restrooms recently, but gender neutral restrooms and having those available. And, it's not enough to have that, that one restroom in the basement that is gender neutral, kind of like the toilet from Hidden Figures that the women of color had to use in the 60s. Let the people who aren't comfortable with the gender neutral bathroom use that one in the basement. It can be the other way around. Also remember that if you're really looking to be on the leading edge, that the LGBTIQ community is not a monolith. And so, just saying, oh, we've got that gay guy in accounting, like that does not mean you have a diverse and inclusive workforce, and that different members of the community have different needs. Our trans members, our non-binary members, whether it's from policies and practices, some of the things that Santana was mentioning, from health benefits, to other needs and accommodations. And so be mindful of the diversity within the LGBTIQ community. So there are also a lot of great resources out there. I'll put a plug in for my former employer, Out and Equal. They are the global leader on these topics, and they have a lot of information on their website alone at outandequal.org. And then they have great conferences and events and other ways to plug in and really key into some of those best practices.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. Maybe we can share some of these or resources we've talked about when we post we post this online, and folks can easily just check them out for themselves. So thank you. Kyle, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. You're mirroring Steve and Santana, but I just want to emphasize words matter. Your strategic plan matters. Your DEIB language matters. So I always consult, when I consulted in the Girl Scouts of Northern California, we write the language, we have a policy, and we visit it all the time. This is evolving. We're always growing and evolving. We also do training. So it's constantly training. It's training the board, it's training your volunteers, it's training your staff, constantly knowing how we show up in the workplace and how we show up to our donors and the community is so important. And as you both touched on, it's more than benefits, it's more than everything. It's really building that culture. I can't emphasize that enough. And the strategic plan, having it in your strategic plan, I think is super powerful for any organization, because you are saying this is what we believe in. And even elected officials. I talk a lot about at GS NorCal, be in front of elected officials, go out there, lobby, advocate. So not only have it in your language and in your overarching teaching and HR and your culture, just go shout it out in the community. We're all about inclusivity. We know it's better for an organization. We know it grows better leaders, stronger companies. So keep talking about it and keep recognizing, I think, that we all have biases. And as Steve was saying, I still do that. Hey guys, I do that all the time and I catch myself. And so it's little things like that, for example, even our board or our volunteers, they don't know sometimes. If you grow up in a certain way, you don't realize that you don't mean to be offensive. You want to be inclusive. Nobody, I think, is out to intentionally hurt anybody, but it's just bringing that to people's attention and letting them know that this really matters. And if you want an inclusive workforce and show up in society that way, use the language, keep teaching.
Thank you, Kyle. I think I will say I certainly have been working on my yes sir and yes ma'ams growing up in the South. It is so ingrained in who I am as a being that I really have to be reminded when it just comes out. So I myself continue to work on many things in that space. And so let's wrap up a little bit of this conversation. And this has been great. And again, there's so much, I feel like we could take up hours in having this conversation, but we're limited. And I'd love to just hear from each of you sort of why is building an inclusive workplace, specifically inclusive LGBTQ, a good business in general, and also really good business for nonprofit and social impact organizations. I'll let whoever would like to jump in first. You guys go for it.
It kind of plays back to my private sector experience, when you talk about why is it good for business. And the real bottom line is that there is an actual business case for LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace. And there have been business cases on this written by Harvard and Stanford, and there's a great organization called Open for Business. The entire organization is dedicated to the business case for inclusion for LGBTQ people in business. And it's based on 27 propositions around economic performance, business performance, and individual performance. So there are research and data on how it's good for business, but particular to this conversation, and when we're talking about workforce development and what it means for individual performance, again, there are hard statistics that show that that inclusive workplaces create increased higher levels of employee satisfaction. They generate higher performance among employees, create stronger team building. They unleash more creativity and innovation. People stay in their jobs longer. So that is like the true business case. If you're a numbers person, you can see the argument for how this is going to help improve your business, whether that's a nonprofit or a for-profit company or a social impact organization. So the case is there. I will also say, it takes a lot of work and energy to be in the closet or to not bring your full self to work. Santana talked about, even what what you're going to wear to work. Like if you don't have to think about that, that's more energy you can put towards doing a great job at work. And nonprofits in particular, we tend to be resource strapped. So you really need people to be able to bring their whole selves to work and be their most productive, their most creative, their most innovative. And that is what an inclusive workplace will bring for you. So that's my little soapbox.
I agree with Steve completely. I was going to say a lot of the same things, but the Girl Scouts are also a membership organization. We want the girls to belong. We want to grow our membership. And to grow membership, we have to be completely inclusive. And we should and mirror the girls that are in our organization. At the Girl Scouts, we always say that we move at the speed of girls. And let me tell you, these young girls blow my mind. They're so far ahead of where I was as a kid. And they want inclusivity. They want like gender fluidity. They want their peers and their friends to feel belonging. That's what the Girl Scout experience is all about. And that's really why I'm with this organization right now. I love that they're doing that. And we all know, well, most of us know that out of the pandemic, young people came out of it very scarred and they were lost and they didn't feel like they belonged. There's a lot of mental health problems. And that's also so important to keep talking about inclusivity with not only the LGBTQ community, but all races, everybody, religious, everything out the window. We've got to support these kids, these new leaders, and let them know we care, you belong here, we're listening to you. And I think that is just universal. And with the Girl Scouts, like I said, yeah, it's a business model. Yeah, we want to retain our membership and grow our membership, but it's the right thing to do. It's to help our future leaders.
Everyone wants to feel safe and everyone wants to feel safe at work. And we're all looking for workplaces that provide that holistic sense of safety, which is an amalgam of all the factors that we talked about today. But feeling safe basically means feeling welcome, having a sense of ease. And you don't feel that as a queer person if you're working somewhere where there aren't intentional measures to welcome us, or if you're a person of color at an organization that acts like not acknowledging race is somehow a benefit. Like by not having intentionally inclusive atmospheres to your workplaces, both culturally and systemically, you're actually just building a microaggressive culture that will very likely push out your staff, or at least make people feel unhappy that aren't, cisgender, heterosexual white males. And BJ, you mentioned this earlier, but a lot of workers today are incredibly discerning, especially in nonprofits and social justice organizations. And they will very quickly go elsewhere to find that inclusive, safe environment. So the more inclusive your workplace is, the more competitive you are. Especially, we've said this multiple times, but especially for Gen Z workers. For Gen Z, an inclusive and safe work environment might actually be of paramount importance for a vast majority of them. Regardless of the attacks happening from a fringe, powerful set of bad actors, inclusivity is still the future. Like you can try to silence it all you want. Like the numbers are what the numbers are. And most Gen Z and millennial workers too are still looking for inclusivity today. And those workers will choose or not choose to work at your organization based off of what they know about your inclusion. And ultimately that can make or break the future of any organization.
Thank you again on behalf of DRiWaterstone, Santana, Kyle, Steve. I'm really grateful to have you join us for this conversation. There were so many incredible points made and really important and critical things that we've highlighted from what does go, from the beginning of our conversation, thinking about DEIB and moving into belonging and this idea of recognition, into reflecting on history and history repeating itself, to the different resources that exist in ERG groups today that we've sort of come in 20 short years. Quite honestly, 20 years is a very short time in history. The evolution of LGBTQ folks in the workplace and where we are. So thank you all again very much for that and sharing your experiences and your thoughts with me and with our audience today. So thank you again. And to everyone out there, thank you for joining us or listening. to this conversation. Again, it's a very important one as we are celebrating Pride Month. June is Pride Month, so we are hoping that folks are celebrating with your staff and creating this type of inclusive and supportive environment in your workplace for your staff and employees. And again, DRI Waterstone is thankful to everybody that has joined us. If you're interested in checking out DRI Waterstone, you can go to our website at DRiWaterstoneHC, as in humancapital.com, and you can see, learn a little bit about us and our services there. And again, thank you everybody, and have a great Pride.